The moment you die, something specific happens to your consciousness, and the Vedic texts mapped it out in precise detail thousands of years before neuroscience had a word for it. Miss this, and you spend your whole life optimizing the wrong thing. Understand it, and how you live changes at the root level. In this video, I'll show you number one, what the Vedic model actually says consciousness is, and why modern researchers are arriving at the same place from a completely different direction. Number two, why the texts say the moment of death is the most revealing test of how you lived, and what that means for the life you're living right now. Number three, the one mental pattern the ancient framework identifies as the deciding factor in what follows death, and how to work with it while you still can. Let's get into it. In 2008, a cardiac surgeon named Dr. Pim van Lommel published a study in The Lancet, one of the most respected medical journals on earth. He had spent a decade tracking 344 cardiac arrest patients, people who had been clinically dead, flatline, no brain activity. 62 of them came back with detailed, verifiable memories of what happened while their hearts were stopped. Not dreams, not hallucinations triggered by oxygen loss. Specific, accurate observations of the room, the staff, conversations happening in the hallway. Van Lommel didn't know what to do with the data. He said, and I'm quoting directly, "The brain does not produce consciousness. Consciousness uses the brain." That conclusion, from a cardiologist with no background in ancient philosophy, is almost word for word what the Vedic texts had been saying for 3,000 years. The standard model most of us grew up with goes like this: the brain generates consciousness the way a fire generates heat. Brain stops, consciousness stops. That's it, lights out. It's clean, it's simple, and for a long time it felt like the only intellectually honest position. But that model has a problem, and it's been a problem for decades. It's called the hard problem of consciousness, a phrase coined by philosopher David Chalmers in 1995. The hard problem is this: we can explain every physical process in the brain, the neurons firing, the chemistry, the electrical signals, but we cannot explain why any of that produces subjective experience. Why does it feel like something to be you? Why is there an inside? No one has answered that, not even close. The Vedic texts, specifically the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, started from a completely different premise. They said consciousness is not a byproduct of matter. Consciousness is the base layer. Matter arises within it, not the other way around. The Sanskrit term is Brahman, the unified field of awareness that underlies all of existence. Your individual consciousness, what the texts call Atman, is not separate from that field. It's more like a wave that has temporarily taken a particular shape in the ocean. The physical body in this model is not what you are. It's what you're currently wearing. The brain is a receiver, not a generator. Think of a radio. When you turn off the radio, the broadcast doesn't stop. The radio just stops receiving it. Van Lommel's patients, by this framework, didn't experience anything miraculous. They experience exactly what the model predicts: consciousness continuing to function when the physical receiver goes offline. Dr. Sam Parnia at NYU Langone has spent years studying resuscitation science and what he calls recalled experiences of death. His work, published in 2023 after studying over 500 cardiac arrest survivors, found consistent patterns: a sense of separation from the body, heightened clarity of awareness, and in some cases, accurate perceptions of physical events happening in the room. Parnia is careful not to make metaphysical claims, but he has said publicly that the data forces us to reconsider the assumption that consciousness is brain-generated. The quantum physicist Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff proposed a theory called orchestrated objective reduction, the idea that consciousness is a fundamental feature of the universe at the quantum level, not something that emerges from complexity. It's controversial. It's also structurally identical to what the Vedic text described without a particle accelerator. The takeaway from this section is not that the Vedic model is proven. It's that the assumption most people carry, that consciousness is a temporary accident of biology, is not the settled science it's often presented as. The question is genuinely open, and the ancient framework deserves a seat at the table. There's a moment described in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 8, verse 6, that stopped me cold the first time I really sat with it. Krishna tells Arjuna, whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, that state he will attain without fail. Read that slowly. Whatever state of being you carry in your final moment of consciousness, that's the state you move into next. Now, before this sounds like a threat, understand what it actually means. It's not a moral punishment, it's a description of physics. The Vedic model says that at the moment of death, the physical body drops away. But the subtle body, what the texts call the Sukshma Sharira, continues. And the subtle body is made of your dominant mental and emotional patterns, your habits of thought, your deepest attachments, the things your mind returns to automatically when it has nothing else to do. Think about what your mind drifts to at 2 a.m. when you can't sleep. That's not random, that's the shape of your subtle body right now. The Katha Upanishad uses the metaphor of a caterpillar moving from one blade of grass to the next. The caterpillar doesn't disappear between blades. It reaches forward, establishes a grip, then releases the old one. The grip it reaches with is the accumulated pattern of its consciousness, what the text calls samskaras, the deep impressions left by repeated thoughts, emotions, and actions. This is where the modern research gets interesting in a different way. Dr. Ian Stevenson at the University of Virginia spent 40 years documenting children who describe detailed, verifiable memories of previous lives, over 2,500 cases. Children in Sri Lanka describing specific houses in India they'd never visited. Children in the American South describing previous lives in rural Turkey with verifiable names, dates, and family members. Stevenson was not a mystic, he was a psychiatrist who applied the same evidentiary standards to this data that he would to any other clinical research. His conclusion was that reincarnation was the most parsimonious explanation for a significant subset of the cases. The Vedic framework says this is exactly what you'd expect. The subtle body carrying its dominant impressions moves into a new configuration. The specific impressions determine the specific conditions of the next experience, not as reward or punishment, but as simple momentum. A ball rolling in a particular direction keeps rolling in that direction until something redirects it. What makes the moment of death significant is not that it's judged by anyone. It's that it's the final readout of everything you've been practicing your entire life. Every time you chose patience over reactivity, you were shaping that readout. Every time you let fear or craving run the show unchecked, you were shaping it in a different direction. The practical weight of this is enormous. The Vedic texts are not telling you to be afraid of death. They're telling you that how you live is the preparation. The quality of your consciousness right now is the thing that matters. Not your bank account, not your reputation, not even your intentions. The actual texture of your moment to moment awareness. The Vedic texts identify one mental pattern above all others as the deciding factor in what follows death. It's not virtue, it's not belief, it's not ritual. It's the degree to which you have loosened the grip of what the texts call upadi, the false identification with temporary things. The Gita's word for this is vairagya, often translated as detachment, but that translation does it a disservice. Detachment sounds like apathy, like you stop caring about anything. Vairagya is not that. It's more like a skilled craftsman who cares deeply about their work, but is not devastated when the project ends. They pour themselves in fully and they can also let go fully. The attachment isn't to the outcome, the engagement is with the process. The texts say that the consciousness which has practiced vairagya, which has learned to engage fully without clinging, moves through death with a kind of clarity. The consciousness that has spent a lifetime gripping, grasping, building its identity around things that can be lost, carries all of that grip into the transition. The subtle body is dense with unresolved wanting. This is something you can actually work with today, not a theory for later. The Vedic practice of what we might call consciousness training is not about preparing for death. It's about being more alive right now. The Bhagavad Gita's concept of nishkama karma, action without attachment to results, is not a spiritual platitude. It's a description of a specific cognitive mode. When you act from that mode, you're fully present, fully engaged, and not running the background program of, what does this mean about me? Will I lose this? What if it goes wrong? That background program is what the texts call the ego's grip, and the research on this is striking. Studies on flow states, the psychological condition of total absorption in an activity, consistently show that the ego's self-referential chatter goes quiet during flow. People in flow states report the same quality of experience that the Vedic texts describe as the fruit of vairagya: clarity, effortlessness, a sense of being larger than the small self. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who spent his career studying flow, described it as the closest most modern people come to what mystics describe as transcendence. The Vedic texts would say that's not a coincidence. That's the same territory, accessed through different doors. The practical application is this: every day, you have moments where you can practice releasing the grip, not abandoning care. Releasing the white knuckle version of care, the kind that's really just fear wearing the costume of ambition or love or responsibility. You do the work fully. You release the outcome genuinely. You come back to the present action. Over time, this practice changes the default texture of your consciousness. The samskaras, the grooves, shift. The subtle body becomes less dense with wanting and more open to clarity. And according to the Vedic framework, that shift is the most important work you can do. Not because death is coming for you specifically, but because the quality of your consciousness right now determines the quality of every moment between now and then. The ancient framework doesn't ask you to believe in reincarnation to benefit from this. It asks you to look honestly at what your mind grips and to practice deliberately the art of full engagement without desperate clinging. That practice of releasing the grip sounds simple, and it is simple, but most people find a specific place where it gets stuck: a relationship, a career decision, a pattern that keeps reasserting itself, no matter how much they understand it intellectually. If that's where you are, understanding the framework but still finding the grip won't loosen. The fastest way through it is a real conversation. Not a course, not more content, a conversation. I do free one on one consultation calls, 15 to 30 minutes, no pitch, completely personal to your situation. You'll walk away with a clear next step that's specific to where you are right now, whether we ever work together beyond that or not. The link to book is in the description at dailymindreset.com/consultation. If this kind of thinking is useful to you, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. What's the one thing your mind grips hardest when you try to let go? Drop it in the comments.